Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Resistance to Change panel discussion hosted by Level Up EQ. This is going to be an organic conversation where we talk with a good handful of leaders about making change in our organizations, about why we're struggling to make that change, and about how we can make that change. So I'm Layton Spinks. I'm head of marketing and customer success here at Level Up EQ, and we're going to kick things off by introducing our moderator, Marla Gibbons. Marla is the fearless founder of Level Up EQ. She's a master certified executive coach, a senior faculty member at the Coaches Training Institute, and she's been training, coaching, and facilitating for 2 decades. She works with people all over the world, specializes in executive teams in tech and biotech, and when she's not rallying our war cry throughout Level Up EQ, you can find her taking a walk with her beloveds, rock climbing, and just being an awesome human being. So without further ado, let's get started. Marla, take it away.
Thank you, Layton. I really appreciate your support, and Marley also, because I know that this kind of thing doesn't go off without the love and logistics, and you bring both of those. So thank you for that. And, you know, I was thinking about this panel discussion and thinking about why we created Level Up EQ. And it really, at the end of the day, is to unleash the magic of human potential and to support organizations in being the place that people can come to and be their best selves and do their best work. And I think I'm so excited to have our panelists here because I think the conversation we're going to have today is at the other end of why that magic does not get unleashed. And that's because we get stuck and we resist either consciously or unconsciously change, both in our own individual lives and in organizations, because organizations are made up of people. So I'm super excited to talk with these folks. They are all at the top of their game in the work that they do around this subject, and they come at it from different places. And I want this is for the attendees and for us to have an organic conversation. Attendees, I ask that for those that are here live to lob questions through the Q&A. We do entertain questions. You shape the conversation and where it goes. We really want that from you. And for us as the panel and moderator, this is a super organic conversation. Everybody off mute, everybody riff on everyone else. I really want this to be a fun conversation where everybody learns and grows. So to launch, I'm very excited to have the folks that we have on this panel, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they know best what they want you to know about them. And I'm going to begin with John. So John, will you go ahead and introduce yourself first?
I'm John Cornwell. I'm the founder of a small but humble consultancy called Connective Development that focuses on connecting strategy, storytelling, and operational execution.
Thank you, John. David.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Unn, and I've spent my career in tech and media. Most recently, I was the Chief Innovation Officer and President of Samsung Electronics, and I'm now working on a new venture in the longevity space, which is a subsection of health and wellness.
Thank you, David. Amy.
Yes, hi, I am Amy. I am the founder and CEO of the Center for Parental Leave Leadership. We are the only full-service consultancy and coaching company to focus exclusively on parental leave, and we've been around for about 10 years. My background is in executive development and coaching, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this with all of you.
So welcome. Thank you so much for giving what is, I think, the most precious thing, which is your time. And so let's have a conversation about this. So I'm going to start with the obvious, and anybody can jump in. Again, this is very organic. So why do you think that people don't change, and why don't organizations change? You giggle.
I'm so excited to hear what other people have to say about this, as I've been thinking about it since I got some of these questions last night.
So jump in. You go, Amy. You start.
Well, I think it's a conversation. There's no one answer. And so that's why I'm curious to hear what everyone has to say. One of the things that I think I can bring to the conversation is I work at a time frame when everything is up in the air and change is inevitable. You're welcoming a child into your family, your professional life and your personal life are changing. And so we're at the intersection of resistance to change at all moments. And so one of the ways that I have developed our work around that is to define the difference between change and transition and what that really looks like. So change is really this moment in time. It's external. It happens to you. It's something you're responding to, but how you change and transition over time is very different, right? That's an internal process. It helps to know that it's time bound. There is a prepare, as the way we talk about it in parental leave, is a preparing for leave, a during leave, and a returning from leave. But that is across all transitions. Transition theory shows us there's a moving into, a moving through, and a moving out of. And so really helping people understand that resistance to change has more to do with their response and their internal experience of that reaction to change. So I'll stop there, and I'm, obviously loads more to say on the topic.
Yeah. Great.
I love that line. I love the resistance to change has more to do with how I think you said internalizing it, Amy. It is so often internal, and I think so much harder to detect because we're often speculating about the black box that may be, employees or coworkers or coachees. I really focus on how change is slowed or stopped by, I see stories and structure as being two areas where change can be really tough. They're very different things, but I think that they link arms in individuals and in organizational heads inside the heads, and they argue that you should stop rocking the boat, that you should go back to a place of security. And by story, I'm really thinking about the narrative, and that's how we tell how we got where we are. And the easiest example for me is when you think about how you conduct yourself in a job interview. Most of us are saying, "Oh, so glad you asked me that question. I started my career here. I learned a hard lesson. I went through a tough stretch. I realized I needed to make a change. I came back stronger than ever." We've got these arcs. And so when we're seeing those arcs all around us in movies, books, and in our workplace, it's easy to cast ourselves as a character in that arc and think about whether our character is inspiring or resilient or a victim and so on. And in a professional setting, I routinely see people write negative or unrealistic stories about their companies or about their jobs. And it's because they're comforting. We're a company that keeps launching new innovations. We launched DE&I during COVID, and we kind of left it behind. We didn't really do anything with it. And so therefore, we're a company that's just not going to do anything. And when those stories pervade, that's really problematic. And then structure is just the lack of connectivity between where we are today and where we're going, and what work people can do to attach to meaning. And if they don't feel attached to meaning, then they start creating negative stories about what's happening.
I've thought and have worked a lot on resistance to change in companies, given that I was innovation officer. And there's a whole conversation we can have, if you'd like, on why I think companies and organizations resist change. But fundamentally, where I always start is, as you were saying, Marla, companies are comprised of people. And so at the end of the day, a company will be resistant to change because people are resistant to change. So then that begs the question of, well, why are people resistant to change? I mean, as a generalization, this is true. And so you double click one level lower, and I mean, I could be completely wrong, but if you think about the way we've evolved over the millennia, it's because we've been able to create patterns, right, of predictability. And predictability has equaled, back in the prehistoric days, survival, and today predictability it equates with security, right, of comfort, right? So you're in the fork in the road, our prehistoric ancestors, and instead of going left like you typically did, you go right, and there you run into the saber-toothed lion, right? Or you decided that even though you've eaten all these kind of berries your whole life, there's this red berry that you come across for the first time and you eat it and it turns out to be poisonous, whatever. So there's these reward systems that we've kind of ingrained where predictability and routine equals security. And so on some level, I wonder if in our own lives, especially, as you think about organizational settings, when you can predict and have a sense of what's around the corner, it feels more secure because it feels more knowable. And this is how companies and people get into trouble because they keep on doing what's been working. And then they develop blind spots. And this is, for those of you who are familiar, the classic innovator's dilemma. So you've been making horse and carriages really successfully, and then someone comes along and offers a car, and you didn't see that coming. Or you've been creating combustion motor vehicles, and then someone decides that they could do it based on an electric battery, right? So whatever that analogy is on a personal level, I think that happens, right? So we get into these routines, and what helps us to stay on these routines is something that I'll take from Marla, paraphrase something that she shared with me a few years ago, and it's that we develop these inner voices, right? These whisperings, and sometimes this is really good stuff because it helps us be creative, but a lot of times it says, this voice says, well, hold on here, you've always gone left, why are you going right? You've always eaten the blueberries, why are you going to eat that red berry? Danger, danger, right? So all these things, I think, kind of are swirling together. And at the end of the day, you resist or hesitate about change.
I love what you're saying. I want to underline, because it's going through everybody's answer here, which is, if we've learned, through however many hundreds of thousands of years, if we go left, we get the right place. If we go right, we're going to get the saber-toothed tiger. Like if we only innovate, or if we have the same pattern that we do over and over again, it's safe. And that gets, epigenetically ingrained. So I think we're not only looking at current time thinking, where we have been conditioned as an organism to have that comfort. I mean, we even talk about the parasympathetic nervous system wants to be in a stasis. So, there's a lot of biological pull to stay comfortable in a known whatever it is, cycle, way of doing things and so forth. And yet that is also true. The magic is in the ability we are still alive because we can be innovative. And so how do we fight that? That biological need to be the same because we survived because of that, Yeah, that's such great stuff. Yeah, jump in.
It's just why I love the parental leave time period so much because everything is thrown up in the air. All your habits, it's chaotic. You cannot do the things that you did before in a way that will get you any outcome that's survivable. And so it's really this time. And so I'm mentioning it in this group and to this audience, because if you can think of those times where it really feels chaotic and hellish and like everything's all over the place, those are the exact moments that you want to create for yourself if you are trying to get out of a rut, if you're trying to move past your change or past your resistance to change. And so I think that's just a concept that is important for this conversation.
Yeah, you're speaking to the post-traumatic growth model, really, because in a way, I have not had kids, but I watch those around me. It's a little traumatic. It's very disruptive.
It can be incredibly traumatic.
And the post-traumatic growth model says, we have a set point that we go to, we hit some kind of trauma, and then we either go back to our set point, we stay at a traumatized state, or we elevate and we go above. And that's, I think, where we're trying to figure out, how do we create whatever mindsets? And it is, the organizational thing is, what do we do about the fact that two things? One, whether you think of this from all of the teams you've been on, if one person changes, the whole team has to start to change. Likewise, the team doesn't want to change, and they also try to keep that person in the same role, whatever. And I don't mean as the VP of marketing. I mean, they have a role. They're the ones that are the protectors, and nobody wants them out of that role, even though they do, and they don't. So there's this complexity to change, because now we have all these entities with cross purposes. And the other piece is I have to say it, capitalism, because our addiction to scale and our addiction to shareholder returns keeps things stuck also, because we go, well, we can't do that because so I'm throwing that into the mix here to see what else you all have to say.
I used to work with startup founders on pitches to help them develop the storylines and the supporting arguments to go get funding. Something that I noticed is that people tend to lean pretty heavily on either heart-based arguments or head-based arguments. They're either really focusing on how they're going to build belief in the audience or how they're going to build buy-in. And those focusing on belief are the ones that are looking for the big stirring messages about how the business that they're building is going to change the world. And the ones that are focusing on buy-in are really going after the numbers folks in the audience and coming up with analyses, however speculative or imprecise they might be, to persuade that audience, no, you should buy into what I'm saying here. And I think being aware that we tend to lean heavily on either belief or buy-in, most of us, not all of us, but most of us do, and then to check ourselves and say, if we're trying to lead change, we've got to address both belief and buy-in. Our hearts, the hearts of our employees may want change, but they want the right change. They want a compelling story about the path and the destination. Otherwise, it can seem, unattainable or not interesting. The folks hearing may say, you know what, I'm just not into this, just not into you, right? It's a manifestation of that. So addressing both of those elements in the audience, even within the same person, of the belief and the buy-in, I think makes a big difference in the efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you think about, you brought up corporations and capitalism, most companies that are commercial enterprises, and this isn't all organizations, obviously, but whatever the goals are, typically they do connect to this idea of growth, right? I mean, the in Silicon Valley, especially, scaling is such a common goal or objective that companies have. And so this idea of transforming yourself just enough so that you continue to grow is a top priority. And so when you present that to people, the idea of generating momentum and growing and scaling, that seems acceptable. When you think about disruption, that's a little more anxiety provoking. Both involve change. So then you say to yourself, as maybe you're a leader of a small team, a large team, maybe you're on a team and you're an individual, why does one sound compelling and why does one sound like scary? And I think a lot of it's not because people aren't good about clarifying what the objective is or what the end result is, although that's certainly a challenge. But they have a hard time connecting where I am today or where the organization is today and where that goal is going to be and what's that path going to be like. And while you may have questions about the organization, and I think, by the way, the ability to tell a story is so critical. What's it going to be like for you, like as an individual? Yeah. Right. And so if organizations can't address it on an organizational level and then frankly bring it down to an individual level, you're not going to get that buy-in because there's going to be a hesitation, right, about committing and really leaning into it. So it sounds obvious, but it's not as frequently well executed, right, as you would like.
Mm. Right.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about what you mentioned around the one person changes, the whole team has to change. And I think that's such an under acknowledged part of the resistance to change because you're really within a group dynamic in an organization. And so
concentric group dynamics.
Exactly.
More complex. Yeah.
And so with those, and within any group dynamic, you have your valences and your different roles that you play, and people don't even recognize when they're in the midst of that sometimes, where they're being pulled into a role or a pattern that, to David's point, may have even been from millennia ago, right? It's a safety issue. So I'm just very intrigued by, we spend a lot of time working with parents on, we see parental leave as a leadership development and a human growth opportunity, and that everything you're learning during that time, you bring back into your organization. And so we work with the new parent, the manager, and the team. So everyone's using that as a way to enhance communication and team efficiencies and connection, and et cetera, et cetera. But what is really where we hit resistance isn't within that group. It becomes within the larger group then. So we know these people having that immediate experience have moved away from the idea that parent goes away, they're in a black hole, they come back, they plug back in exactly where they were. They know that's not happening because they're experiencing it on the day-to-day. But it's that larger pressure within the division or the company that causes the friction and forces people back into the old way. Where they were, it keeps them at stasis instead of that growth that you were talking about. So just an interesting part of the process, I think.
David, when you're talking about the individuals and their composition, their resistance being really my words, not yours, but it kind of buck stops here. If the individual's not bought in, and the team's not bought in. If the team's not bought in, then a larger multi-team organization isn't bought in. And I think when I focus on individuals in organizations and ask them, what's your resistance to this? What's your hesitation? What I typically hear are things like, it's really up to my leaders to drive change. It's not up to me. I don't have the power to do that. or it's up to my team to drive change. Again, I don't have the power to create that impact. And so, of course, to your point, it's showing them their impact, really providing that clear linkage between the work they're doing and where the company needs to grow, that makes them feel like, okay, got it. Now I understand why what I'm doing is making a difference. And it's at a story level, but I also used the word structure earlier because there is this whole very nuts and bolts blocking and tackling operational piece where you're chunking a long-term thing down to an annual thing with projects and metrics, and then you're chunking those down to an individual level and saying, here's the work you're attached to. Here's what we're expecting you to do. Do you agree that this is realistic or not? Let's adjust it. And here's what we're going to reward you on as achievement of these things, because they're so important to the achievement of this long-term growth. But designing that blueprint in an effective way so it can be deployed done at an individual level. If that's not happening, it's just as you say, David, it's people opting out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you really do have to bring it down to an individual level. And so much of this is about communicating, right? As you're saying. And so in the story and in the way you bring people along, it's so critical. Partly because of what Amy was saying earlier, like sometimes you're in it and you don't even recognize what's going around. It's hard to kind of be in the swirl, right? And kind of make sense of where this is all headed. Like if someone told me, and it sounds true, it could be wrong, but it sounds true that the digital camera was actually invented, or like super important parts of what became the first digital camera were invented at Kodak, right? But they were so focused on continuing to sell that profitable film that's what they focused on, and they didn't want to change or disrupt, right? And so this is what happens. And I think it happens on an individual level. And, we're talking to a group of folks here who on their own decided to Zoom in to have a discussion around resistance to change. So, we're talking to a self-selected audience here, but most people would, frankly, and it's not a criticism, but it's a more of a natural, comfortable thing to just bury your head in the sand and just keep on doing what you're doing, right? Because again, that's what you know. And so unless you can break it down, and if no one's doing it for you, then doing it for yourself and saying, okay, if I go from step 1 to 100, that just is too much. What do steps 1 through 5 look like? Like, let me break it down for myself and let me just get to step number 5. And then when I'm at step 5, what does step 5 through 10 look like, But that's, I think, and that's in a super probably simplified way. That's how you ultimately drive change in organizations, right? You have to bring people along.
But I still want us to there is the book Resistance to Change, and she has people go through a process where ultimately you have to really dig into your own stuff. I mean, you really have to look within and see and get real with yourself about what's in the way. No, really, what's in the way? You say you want this. I listened to a podcast with Brene Brown, and she did the process with Brene, and it was great. It was like she did it on not wanting to drink so much Diet Coke. And then she did it about how she was with her team. And I think there is this, part of why I think we don't change, and I'd love to hear what you all think about this, organizations change all the time. I think we do too much changing, and that's part of what is a problem, because there's a resistance to stay with the thing we said we were going to do. As leadership changes, then they want to reinvent. I think there's that issue, but there's a lack of individual maturity, for lack of a better word. They've looked inside, they've, thought about their family of origin, they see why they stop themselves at certain places, and they've done the work. And when I say the work, it's like the internal personal work that unleashes their leadership. So I'm wondering, that's kind of my thinking about it, but why, what is it about the individual and why don't they change? Because that's just what an organization is. Yes, but then it has the complexity of the systems part of it. Thoughts about that?
People want it to be easier. They want to be, they don't want to change. That sounds hard. It just.
Yeah.
And then you can make all sorts of excuses about it. I'm powerless, I'm this, I'm that, but
I don't have enough time.
I don't want to change my diet because that food's delicious, whatever it is. But it's just habits and ease of mind and body. And it's hard, which is, David keeps using the word disruption. And I think it's a really important word here, because it's those moments of disruption where people can't do it easy anymore, where you've hit a block, and again, parental leave. Like that's the biggest one employees will face in their career life cycle, and the majority of employees will face. So if we can harness that as a learning opportunity, and what I mean by that is not just learning about how do I do my parental leave and how do I become a parent, but how do I want to be as a person and as a professional in my life? And what are my goals? What are my values? What is my plan to get there? And how do I do that now that I've been given this gift of chaos, right? Of a chance to look in and adjust.
Two things come to mind for me. One of them, we have focused a lot, I think, in the last 10 years in a professional setting, as well as in a personal setting, but I think increasingly in a professional setting, on wellness. And of course, all of us here in the panel group and in the audience, I'm sure, have had conversations with ourselves and each other about work-life balance. What is more likely to disrupt your work-life balance than change? Whether it's something like an incoming kid or something like a company, your own company, doing things in a very different way. You can no longer go to work, do the thing you were doing, and then go home. You go to work, there's a bunch of things shifting underneath your feet, and what you carry home inevitably is uncertainty or confusion or anxiety or maybe some positive things. But you are much more likely to feel those throughout your waking hours than you were when you were working at a company that's more in stasis. So that's a very real negative reinforcement for engaging emotionally in the change.
John, you're reminding me of something I wanted to tie up what I was saying a second ago. And it's just to invite the listeners in those moments where they have that opportunity to go inward. And, for parental leave, you're learning how to do that. So it isn't about what you're learning to do, it's about what you're learning how to do. And so noticing, I'm taking this moment to reflect, I'm putting my plan in place, I'm changing my habit of mind or my story, those things. You're getting practice in how to do that. And so consciously recognizing what you're doing and then rebuilding it in ways that work for you. Try it out, see how it goes.
Yeah, I think on the theme of recognizing what you're doing, I think this idea of resistance to change, it would be inaccurate to say, oh, the folks at work that are resistant to change are not working hard, or they're the low performers. It's actually a lot of times the exact opposite. Yeah. Right. So resistance to change doesn't mean like you're sitting out and not trying to make contributions. For me, in fact, a lot of times the people who are the most frenetic and the busiest and will tell you about how busy they are actually the ones who are the most resistant to change, sometimes unknowingly. And what happens is, and I would sort of point this out, you get a group of smart people together who care. It's actually not that difficult to talk about what could go wrong. right? It's more challenging, frankly, and more difficult and more risky to talk about what could go right in the face of a change or a choice to change, right? So you're in the discussion and you're talking about what could go wrong, but you're not constructively thinking about how to sort of move forward with the change. And a lot of times, especially in organizations, the cultures kind of turn sideways a bit, where people can mistake being busy with making progress, right? So if I'm busy and I'm overscheduled, then I must be making an impact and contributions and progress and everything, when in fact you're being busy. And sometimes feeling busy makes you feel like you're doing okay, and therefore you wouldn't categorize yourself or the organization or the team as being resistant to change. So some of this is like just sort of turning the lens on yourself and saying, what's really going on here.
Yeah, it reminds me of in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about why people don't become wealthy, in an investor's mindset. He said the first thing is they get lazy by being too busy. They don't have time to stop and think about how they would build well, even have the conversation like you're saying, how could I make it right? How could I have it happen? They just say that I don't have time. And it's a way of being lazy around change, which I really thought was an interesting way, but it is true because we don't have time. We think we don't prioritize. But I mean, that still goes back to, again, I want to just keep pointing back to, how do we support or invite people like Amy, you're talking about having people shift a mindset around how they see this, disruption around having a baby is like, become a leader, think about who you want to be. Like that requires possibly somebody letting go of a story. And this is the thing John's talking about. I'm a victim, or I don't have the power, or I can't do this. And David, you talked about that inner voice. I call it in my work, the saboteur or the gremlin or the critic. And how do you all work with people to help them unhook from that? Because that's the negative story. Oh my God, you better not do that because what the hell, and how do we hook on to the positive story? Or the story we want to create, or the story we dream of. And that's individually and organizationally.
Yeah. There's a real simple exercise that is really profound that Tara Moore does. Are any of you familiar with Tara Moore's work? She does work, her book and her coaching work and other things are around playing big. So how playing big in the world. But her inner critic work is really useful. And it's so simple. It's like, recognize your inner critic, talk to her or him, name them, define them, have them be somebody, use them. I'm not going to, I can't remember the exact exercise, but I can send you a link to it so you can share it with your audience. But it's a really useful one, just short, sweet, and it really is impactful. Recognizing that voice and turning it to your favor.
Yeah. Or at least knowing it's outside of you and it isn't you. Do a lot of work with my clients around that. It's like, this is one, I say we have a shitty committee and we have a wise council, both in our heads, and we get to choose which we listen to.
Yeah. And it is that externalizing it. That's what the naming and the like, okay, you're getting your own persona there because you're not helping me in this way.
Exactly.
I love the externalizing piece. I also, by the way, Marla love the term shitty committee. I will not forget that anytime soon. It's interesting when I work with leaders to develop storyboards for strategy. How are you going to articulate your strategy? You can't lead it if you can't tell a good, compelling, engaging story around it. Nearly every single leader will say, oh, we've got some slides, and they'll reach for material that's already built, that's almost always in PowerPoint, and say, can't we do something to repurpose these? And I'll always say, no, let's go find a whiteboard, or hell, use Word. Just use something that you don't have lying around, and let's think about these in a sentence form. And then when you're done with the beats of the story, read them out loud. Let your ear pick up those breaks, the dissonance and flow that you otherwise would miss just reading it. And I'm giving those as examples, but they're examples of how mindful people have to be to stop just reaching for the script that they've always had, because you'll wind up with largely the same result. There's a very specific set of things that they need to do to just break that entirely and start building a new one and staring at it and saying, does this even make sense? Do I like this? Do I like what it's saying? Is it me? Is it what I want to be? It takes those kinds of breaks in order to separate from what's been done in the past.
Yeah, I like the concept of a script, because it turns out, so the first step is even understanding that there's an inner voice that exists. And then the second, I guess, is, as Amy was saying, like, externalizing it and even talking to it. But I think we all have scripts. We all have scripts.
Conscious and unconscious scripts.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And as do organizations, right? It's the unwritten, like, this is the way we do things kind of thing sometimes in organizations. But we, as individuals, we have scripts too. And so can you recognize when you're sort of pressing the play button on a script that's been written before, whether it's helpful or not? I think when I was first introduced to this idea of this inner voice, when you're a kid, you watch the cartoons and there's like a little angel on one shoulder and then a little devil and on the other shoulder, and they're kind of whispering into the ears of the cartoon character. I kind of thought, well, on some level, we all have that. Like, we have these scripts or inner voices that say, oh, go for it and do this. That could be exciting. And then the other voices that say, well, what if this happened and and it wasn't a good thing? Then what would happen to you? And then you, before you know, it's a very dramatic, cascading of dominoes. And you say, I will resist change ultimately. So maybe recognizing when a script is in play and then sort of externalizing it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really loving the conversation around, we have stories, and I think often people will go, no, this is the truth. This is my clients will go, and it's capital T, the truth. And they don't have any flexibility around recognizing there's actually 16 truths, maybe 1,600 or 16,000 truths you could have in this moment about what's going on if you just chose to choose that story. And there's a level of, flexibility, inner flexibility and agility, that it's like, so that I can see the story. Oh, when I was 6, I made a decision. I'm not going to do scary things because I broke my leg and that was traumatizing, and therefore I don't do scary things anymore. But that script still runs and we don't challenge it, and we think it's the truth. And it's like, we need a bunch of adventurers out there that are willing to go, hey, I'm willing to do the inner adventure to actually challenge my stories and challenge the organizational stories. Because then when our survival, because I think a lot of times organization equals survival for people. It's what they have now attached, hunting and gathering, it's going to work. And so if we're not doing it right, we may not eat, or we may not have a house, because I'm going to get fired. Okay, I'm just going to stay comfortable. But we have to have that inner exploration and willingness to grow in order to get flexible. You know, I mean, I'm saying that like that's a truth. I don't know. That's my thought. And I'm wondering what you.
Well, I just love, there's a lot of pieces of that are coming together. The hunter gatherer and the one of the many degrees it's done over the years and things I've gotten to study is cultural anthropology. And it just reminds me, Marla, of so much of this is people can't even imagine what the other options would look like. And one of the things I do with my kids that drives them a little crazy and I love is whenever they get stuck in their capital T truth, to use your words, is I make them go learn about a different culture where that is like something that would never, ever happen. And they would think we were crazy to do it that way. So like I'm just thinking about how to disrupt those scripts, right? Like how, when they're going, how do you do it? And you have to just question it and say, oh, what would an Eskimo do in this scenario right now? Could they even imagine it? Whatever it is.
I love, Marla, that you get the opportunity to have the conversations that I'm sure you are having with people who are grappling with resistance to change in a workplace. I have started pursuing coaching certification specifically because a number of the questions that you just posed, I think could, at least on a corporate-wide level, be pursued as very personal and potentially invasive, but on a one-on-one basis, where with the right context, including companies who are bringing in coaches, then it becomes much more appropriate to say, is this a place that you want to work? If so, and you're feeling resistant to change, how can we look at some of the scripts that you're currently carrying, the issues that you're grappling with? How can we help connect you? Conversations that are, I don't know if intimate is the right word, or personal. You would know better than I would.
Personal and intimate at times. Yeah, for sure. I mean, because it is, right? When it all comes back to, I mean, we haven't looked a lot at that complexity of system when we get into an organization that sometimes becomes a family system, and that sticks the change process too. So we've got the individual sticking, and then we've got that. But it is at the end of the day, it all comes back to, I have to be willing to look at my own inner stories and demons and angels, you know, in my mind. But I may be, you know, that guy with a hammer that thinks everything is a nail. And because I work with individuals, I work with teams too, but, you know, ultimately I recognize that individuals have to change in order for the systems to unstick. So, you know, I'm curious, I would love to just ask this kind of what I call back of the pocket, like my back pocket question, which is, I'm wondering for you individually, if you've ever hit a change that you were resistant to, and if you did or didn't, how did you get out of your resistance? What did you do individually to make that change? And while you're thinking, I'll just say my short one, which is in process, which is going off of my beloved, I don't drink a lot of caffeine. I drink 1 cup of very fine black tea in the morning, and I'm off of it now. And the process of, I love it so much. I can say I'm an addict. I'm, you know, I am powerless to it, yet I am doing my best to not drink it. And it's been a real process of having to watch myself not change, even though I want to change, and be humbled by my lack of ability to, and then really trying to access both the systems, like, okay, I'm going to put this out in the morning because in the morning I don't have as much resilience to take doing the right thing as I do in the evening. And so I set myself up to take the right kind of tea bag out instead of the wrong kind of tea bag out. But then I'm also keep saying, what am I actually wanting in my life? Why am I making this choice? So it's both a looking within and creating a system around me that tends to hold my intention at a time when it's most strong. So I'm wondering if you would share, doesn't have to be a big one, that's a very simple one, but yet very, very compelling in the not wanting to change.
I'm going to be inspired by Amy because having kids for me was a huge shift. I had kids later in life. I had done lots of travel and had all sorts of adventures, and for which I'm very grateful. Having kids meant discontinuing a lot of that out of necessity, not just necessity of being available to them, but really embracing fatherhood and learning it and understanding it and trying to be good at it. So my way of dealing with that was, I've never been a great classroom learner. I've always been much better at learning from other people. And so sitting with people I admired and saying, how did you get through this? And what did you do? What did you reach for? What have you found meaningful about it? Where did you derive a sense of purpose? How did you get up in the morning and feel like you were doing a decent job instead of berating yourself? I think is really helpful. P.S. For those kinds of people, planting champions for change throughout an organization, knowing that someone is inevitably going to come talk to them and bounce ideas off of them, and knowing that they're going to be able to be positively viral is really important.
That's great. One more. Who wants to share theirs?
Well, I'm actually going through a change in myself. I've over the years, I've always worked for a company, right? And big, small, in between. And the way I sort of see it is, there's an opportunity right now to create my own thing, right? Where I'm not working for someone else, but and I've never done that before. And I've always been kind of fascinated by that, but never sort of took that leap to create my own thing. And so I'm going through that process now, and there's a lot of voices. There's a lot of voices on any given day, ranging from really energizing, exciting, like voices that make me feel like this is absolutely the path to pursue, to all those voices we have that, it's imposter syndrome, like, why are you doing this? How can you, so much more difficult to do this or that when you could pursue things that are a little bit closer to your wheelhouse, et cetera. So I'm going through it now. And so this conversation today is actually really helpful. Lots of good reminders.
Marla, can I say one?
Yeah, please. We have time, so please
Do you
do.
have time? I appreciate everyone sharing these. I think there's just an obvious thread here that we haven't touched on, that we live in such an individualistic society, this idea that we're supposed to do it and we're supposed to know how, and we're supposed to recognize when we're stuck in a pattern and all of these things. Get support. Like there's like it could be as obvious as coaching. John, as you're talking, I'm like, fantastic. And you needed one of our coaches, right? Like, but any of us do that. And then there's something else that you said about planning champions. And so I think you can notice, like you all have done, who those champions are, reaching out to them. People want to support. So it doesn't have to be hiring a coach, to be talking to your friend. Just don't do it by yourself.
Great point.
I fall into it all the time, the time.
Yeah. Well, we
Right,
don't.
I mean,
We should
if
be
you're
able
the-
to do it. Yeah.
If you're the CEO of your own career, as they say, then you should have a board, right?
Yep.
Of advisors.
Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether you're inside or outside of an organization.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I'm hearing get help. And I love get inspiration, John, is what I get from what you did, and recognize the voices, which David, you're saying both the positive and the ones that want to get you, to stop what you're doing. And
reframe them. There was a reframing in there too, that I want to underscore.
Yeah, right.
Like you can choose your uncomfortable, right? I think we often forget that when we're in the midst of trying to stop doing something, like that, we want that easy thing, but we can choose. They're all uncomfortable. We're just choosing our uncomfortable. If we're smoking, the uncomfortable is we're going to have lung cancer, right? But if we choose the uncomfortable as quitting that cigarette, we have a little bit of self-efficacy.
Yeah.
Design your narrative.
Yes. Yes, exactly. 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 So I want to thank you three amazing human beings in both what you are as a human and your own growth and development, but what you do for others in your spaces and supporting people in their growth. I'm taking away a reinvigoration to both the stories matter and the voices. And like I say to my clients often, you know, the voice, like if I could just have my clients walk away understanding there are voices and you get to choose who you listen to, my life would be well used. And I can look back at my life and feel like I did a good job of being a good human in the world. And you all underlined it. So it makes me really happy to know that you all are out there doing that work and sharing with our listeners that that is where we have to go in order to break through the resistance, is to listen to what those voices are saying and make a choice about what the story is we want to unfold in our organization, in our world, in our lives, and in our leadership. And so thank you all for your wisdom. I love when I walk away, like David, you think you're like, oh, I just learned a bunch of stuff. I love it when like I plan the thing and it's like for my own little master class of how to learn how to do this. So thank you very much for this. And I do want to take 2 seconds to say, for those listening, that so that we can provide allyship and support for growth and development in teams and organizations, we are offering what I think is an amazing promotion to have us come in and do a way to create the narrative of your team, an Enneagram assessment, which is a very high density assessment around personality styles. It's not anything like you've probably done before. It's got a lot of opportunity to look at where we have our default and where our personality could grow to be the most impactful and leaderful. And we're doing that along with the assessment debrief and one team coaching. And so that is, I think, something like $3,000, and we're offering it for $1,300. So if you are at all interested in making changes with your team, this is a thing that would support launching change with your team. So we do that because we want to support those folks out there that have organizations that are wanting to grow and change, and they just don't exactly know how and want the support. So enough of my commercial. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you all for your kind attention and listening. Thank you for being a part of our purpose, which ultimately is to unleash the magic of human potential. And we did that today. So thank you for being a part of making that happen in the world.